The focus of Sam McEwen's Husker Rewind article over the weekend was sacks and turnovers. And it was something Matt Rule said after the Saturday, or on the day of the Saturday scrimmage, or it wasn't even a scrimmage, it was just the paid practice, that the goal is 20 takeaways. We need 20 takeaways.
Mm-hmm. And that was in 12 games, right? Didn't he emphasize?
Yes.
I guess he just said we have to take the ball away 20 times.
Yeah, I mean,
and I'm not talking about like 5-1 game against an inferior opponent, maybe. I'm saying you've got to take the ball away. And that was an issue last year with sacks. Sacks happened in a couple of games. Otherwise, they were very pedestrian.
But 40 sacks and 20 takeaways. As Sam wrote, the last defense to pull off that double at Nebraska was 2009.
Yeah.
44 and 28.
Sheesh.
According to Sam's research, 16 power conference defenses across 3 seasons have hit the 40-20 mark. That's 40 sacks, 20 takeaways. Of the 16 teams that did it, 13 of them won 10 games. Only 2 won 8 games, and Pittsburgh won 9. So at the bare minimum,
you're getting 8.
You're getting 8 wins.
Wow.
If you can get to 40 and 20.
Yeah, and that was what Jamari Butler said. You said that, right? We want to try to get that 40. And as Sam wrote, sacks that is. Look, bold goals, right? I know that one of the things when we were talking about Matt Rule last year at this time, before his first game, that his Baylor teams did and his Temple teams did, the longer that you went into his tenure, they got sacks. And it is just such a game changer, and Nebraska has been unable to do that throughout the last handful of years.
On average, the teams that did 40-20 won 78% of their games. Georgia won a national title doing it. Alabama in 2021 played for it, doing it. But the interesting thing is, of those 16 teams since 2021, only 3 were Big Ten schools. So it doesn't happen very much in the Big Ten. Now, some of that, it's probably more on the sack side because, in the Big Ten, maybe the opportunities to sack the quarterback are fewer because teams are running the ball.
Sure. That's a good point. That's an interesting point.
I'm just spitballing what a possible theory might be. But you look at, I guess I haven't looked at Iowa's numbers. Iowa was very good at getting takeaways.
But it must not be as disruptive with the sacks.
But yeah, I'm trying to think, and again, I'm going to look this up to see if I'm imagining things. So last year, Iowa had 33 sacks. The year before that, they had 34. Year before that, 31, 22.
And remember, they're playing 13 or 14 game seasons.
Correct. 13 games all across, 33. So it's not a big sack team. I mean, they get
a lot of takeaways.
But you know what they are? They're damn if they're anything, if they're consistent. I'm looking at all these numbers going back a decade, and they're anywhere between 28 and 33.
Interesting. I mean, that's a good place to be
consistent.
It's not as high end as 40. Let me ask you this. Is this a realistic goal? Like, they can have all the goals they want. I'm not here to say that it's stupid to think one way or the other. Is that a realistic number though? Is 40 this soon?
Well,
and you have the numbers up right now. So last year they had 32. And remember, the last 7 seasons that we have listed are non-bowl years. And so outside of COVID, which was a 9-game season, we're talking about 12. And the most they had in that stretch was actually last year. So like if you're looking for optimism on why they can get to 40, I would start with they already got to 32 last year. They got to 32 in a 12-game schedule. We expect them to play 13 this year. And can you have some of that just natural improvement and progression? Meanwhile, though, the argument against that would be the last time they had 40 was the greatest defense of my lifetime in 2009. So, that's difficult. And I thought you just brought up a really good point. Is there something to be said about the offenses that they play? And maybe that doesn't allow defenses to get as many sacks.
Nebraska last year with 32 sacks. That's the first time they'd even cleared 30 since 2013.
That's fascinating.
And
that's both second to last season.
It goes as low now. The COVID year, they had 13 sacks.
Yeah, throw that one to the side.
But 2017,
dude, Diakomania.
14 sacks.
Dude, that is barely one a game.
They basically average 1 sack
That
a
is
game.
Gross. That is horrible.
1 sack per game.
Yeah. Yeah, and outside of that, though, I mean, still 20 in 2021, Yeah, 21 in 2022, 21 in 2011. I mean, those are very, very pedestrian
Very
numbers.
average numbers. So you ask the question,
Is it realistic?
is it realistic?
Like, let me pose it to you in a different way. So if we're talking about the season and we're saying, hey, give us realistic numbers that Adrian Martinez can get to. If I were to say, John, let's talk about realistic sack numbers, and I threw out 40 as the first number, would you bristle?
That's not realistic.
That's what I would think too.
That's not realistic.
I think.
Are you expecting them to jump basically almost a sack per game?
So real quick, the math of
from last year,
yes, 2 points. Let's just call it 2.7, and if you multiply that number by 13, you would get to about 35. So we're talking about, because of the 13th game, we're talking about an additional 5. So one every other to every third game. When you put it that way, it doesn't sound as ridiculous. The thing is, and I'll pull up the numbers because I do really like looking at them. And you know what, man? This is funny. They still finished last year 39th in the country in sacks. But when you dive into it, you see that half of them came in 2 games. They had 8 versus Colorado.
Yeah.
And we know the story about that, right? Shador holds onto the football. They had 8 against Northwestern. Other than that, though, they had 16 in the other 10 games. So we're essentially talking about a sack and a half per game. And they had 3 games with 3 sacks. Minnesota, so they had 11 in the first 2 games. They had 3 sacks against Minnesota. They had 3 sacks against Northern Illinois. They had 3 sacks against Michigan State. The big problem of last year, they had 2 games with 0, La Tech and Michigan, and they had 3 games with 1, Purdue, Maryland, and Iowa. So you had a combined 5 games where they had 3 sacks total. That's the thing that has to change. Like, in a way, I do like talking about, can they get to 40? But in a way, I like talking about, can they get to 2 a game? If you get to 2 a game, then you're at 24, 26. If you go to a bowl, now you're cooking, because your floor is 2, and then your ceiling, can their ceiling be 8 again? Maybe. I don't know. Can their ceiling be 6 or 7, though? And can they get 6 sacks in like 2 games and 7 sacks in 1? That is how you go from 32 to 40.
Honestly, the tougher question might be, can they get to the 20 takeaways?
Yeah.
Because, and we've got a chart up for those of you watching it on the stream. Now, this is just positive turnover margin, so this isn't takeaways. But Nebraska's only been in the positive turnover margin 9 times since 2021. They've averaged 3 times per year. And
that's baffling.
And the crazy thing is, they've lost almost half those games. They're 5-4 in those games. And remember, when Nebraska's in the positive turnover margin,
historically,
since 2008, they're 51-8. So half of those 8 losses came in the last 3 years.
That's wild.
Including 2 each. Well, it was 2 each in 2021 and 2022. And they were only in positive turnover margin 1 time last year.
Wow.
Against Louisiana Tech. But
so if you take away last year, then the numbers are even worse, because then they're a 500 football team in those other 2 seasons.
But when you look at just raw takeaways, last year they only had 14. 2022, 16. 2021, 13. We'll skip 2020. 2019, they hit 21 takeaways. They had 20 on the dot in 2018. They only had 12 in 2017. So, yes, they have hit it a couple of times in the last 6 years, but barely.
So what did they have last year again? It was 14?
They had 14 takeaways last year, 5 fumble gains, 5 interception gains.
So again, if you just correlate it game to game, if you do the math, that would be, in a 13-game season, it'd be 15.2. So let's just call it 15. Okay, so then again, can you find 5 more? This is, I mean, look, we'll talk about this in the lead up to the season. This is how you go from 5-7 to 8-4. These 2 stats are going to be a big part of them going from a sub 500 team to an above 500 team, and perhaps getting closer to that Jack Mitchell 8-4 number, or the maybe Steve Sipple 8-4 number.
But keep in mind, 40-20, it's only been done 16 times over 3 years.
That's going to be hard.
And those are really, really good teams that did them. Mm-hmm. So I don't think you don't have to get to 40-20 to have a good season. But if they do get to 40-20, they will have a good season.
100%. Yeah.